Hello and welcome, everyone. I'm Becky Schilling. It's great to have you with us for today's eMarketer Tech Talk, where we host amazing guests from all areas of media, ad tech, and martech. Today, we're discussing the benefits of an agile customer data platform and how its use can elevate your brand's customer experience strategy. With that, let me introduce our guests. David Raab, the founder at CDP Institute, is joining us from Connecticut. Hi, David.
Hi, Becky.
And Steve Zisk, product marketing principal at Redpoint Global, is joining us from Boston. Hey, Steve.
Hi, Becky.
Before we get into it, to our audience, let's keep it conversational. Just use the chat window on the right to tell us where you're joining us from and to submit your questions. We'll do our best to get to as many of your live questions as we can during the Q&A, so keep them coming. We have lots of great content planned today. Steve, over to you.
Thank you so much, Becky. I'm looking forward to a conversation about agility. We're going to talk about an agile marketing platform, but it's really useful to remember that agility starts with the people who are members of our marketing and IT team. And so I want to talk for a minute about what it means to be agile as a marketer. The primary things that we should be understanding are that we have to, as marketers, react to events that are happening in real time, take advantage of changes, leverage data that may be coming in, analytics that we're performing, handle changes in customers and in their situations. And we have to do all of that while continuing to deliver the results that our management expects. I'll give you a simple example. At the beginning of COVID, buy online, pick up in store, BOPIS, was a niche kind of an application. Suddenly, everybody was stuck inside, and it went from being a niche application to being an absolute must-have. And then over the course of a year or two, moved from being a must-have to being table stakes. We've seen a lot of changes in the last 10 years. I'm expecting a lot more in the next 5 years. Those kinds of changes require a tremendous amount of marketer agility. And I'd love to bring into the conversation David Raab to talk a little bit about why agility is so important to the marketer.
I think agility is important, Steve, because our customers expect it. They don't even know that they expect it. They just expect that we're going to be giving them all the latest and greatest stuff. So you're like the famous duck who's very calm on the surface, but paddling right crazy underneath to deliver that agility, deliver all these cool things that they saw, like your BOPIS example, which looks easy to them because, hey, what's the big deal? You just do what everybody else is doing. But in fact, of course, we know that there's a great deal of tech that has to be adapted and changed on a dime to make all this possible. So it's really important to have that structure in place, that supporting structure that lets you move quickly. We talk sometimes about having a stage that's very solid so the dancers can jump around. So you have to have that really solid platform or stage in order to be agile. And again, it has to do with the customer demands, and which are changing constantly, and the environment changing constantly in terms of regulatory situations and new tech. And then, of course, the market itself, as your competitors adapt to these things, you have to adapt to the competitors. So there's this just huge need to move quickly and be agile.
So that's a great point. And the other side of that, from my point of view, is that agility is not done in a vacuum. I, as a marketer, have to operate as part of a team, and that team extends to other areas and other functions within the business. So being able to be an agile marketer, I'm expecting that the processes that I'm using and the underlying technology itself will support that agility. And there's a whole bunch of challenges that I have to face as a marketer where things may be getting in my way. For instance, customer data may be unfit, may be missing, or as is commonly the case, may be siloed in a whole bunch of different kinds of systems. And I need to be able to pull that information together, create a single customer view, stitch or do more sophisticated identity resolution in order to understand which pieces of information I have are associated with which customers. And I have to be able to do that all in a way that meets the expected cadence of the customers. And in a similar way, I have to make sure that all of my processes and software across my MarTech environment are also stitched together, and I can make sure that the message that I'm giving to my customers is consistent across all of those channels. And that complexity is just going up. We have a number of channels that we use today that were not popular 5 or 10 years ago, especially in the social areas. And we have a number of initiatives and changes like retail media networks that imply customer data monetization that we have to do in an intelligent way and in a way that emphasizes the values of the customers, not just our internal values as marketer, but our respect for and understanding of what the customers are doing. And I'd love to hear your thoughts a little bit, both on those different pieces of customer technology and on the different roles that have to be fulfilled in order to meet the customers where they are.
So sure. So certainly, Steve, data readiness is kind of the #1 problem that we see consistently, and silos are right up there. In terms of the roles that you're going to see in a CDP, obviously the marketers are the consumers of the CDP. They're going to use this data to do all those wonderful things that the company wants and that the customers expect. But there again is this IT component to all this underneath it that makes it possible. And we have data engineers, we have data scientists, we have analysts, we actually have a whole bunch of people who are involved in we have compliance people and privacy people. There's a lot of folks involved in delivering that wonderful customer data that the marketers then get to use to service their customers. So it's a big project and involves a lot of folks. And so you have this whole organizational issue of how to coordinate all those activities.
Absolutely. And I'd like to point out also that data doesn't naturally come clean and ready to use. You actually have to perform various software processes and potentially people processes in order to get there. And that's recognized in a couple of statistics I'd like to highlight. Marketers recognize, 87% of them in a recent survey recognize that data is the most underutilized asset. It's stuck in places where it isn't as necessary, and being able to activate it and use it and gain insights from it and use it to derive customer value can be very difficult. About half of marketers also recognize, and this is something that I'd love to see that number go up to more like the 87%, but we're not there yet. About half of marketers recognize that data quality and completeness is a big challenge. I think that's actually going to be a bigger challenge over time as we move away from third-party data and push towards first-party data. But I'd love your perspective on that, especially in the context of understanding that data comes in all sizes and shapes, and marketers really need to be fitting that data to the use cases that they're trying to solve for. So I'd like to ask you, David, the question, how much data is enough, and how do I make sure that data is ready for use?
Well, how much data is enough? It's kind of like how high is up, right? There's no real answer. It's just, it depends on what you're going to do with it. And I'll pause right now and I'll put on my use case hat, because this really all comes down to use cases, right? You have to have the use cases that tell you how you're going to use your data, because that tells you what data you want. And you're not going to start out with the most complicated use case. You're going to start out with a simple use case that uses just a relatively small amount of data, and then you're going to build on that over time. And everything that you do has to add value to the company and add value to the client. This is this value exchange that we talk about there, right? Now, they understand that you're using their data. There are more and more requirements to consent to use that data, so they have at least some control, but they also kind of know that you're collecting data that you don't need their consent to collect, because a lot of it is operational data that doesn't require that. So they're willing to give you their data, but they want something in return for it. They want typically a better experience. They want value. They want coupons and discounts and things like that. What they don't want is they don't want personalized advertising. And this is sometimes hard for marketers to get their head around because when they think customer, they think, oh, this is all about personalized advertising. But if you ask a consumer if they want any kind of advertising, personalized or otherwise, the answer is, oh, heavens, no. On the other hand, if you ask them, well, do you want recommendations based on your purchase history? Oh, yeah, I want that. Do you want discounts based on your purchase? Oh, yeah, sure, I want that stuff. So, do you want a loyalty program that rewards your behaviors? Oh, of course, I want that. So, they want stuff, and they want stuff that takes customer data, and they want stuff that really boils down to personalized treatment, but they just don't want that personalized advertising. So, you have to be kind of careful how you position it, and bear in mind delivering value to the customer. That's the really critical thing. If you deliver them good value and you show them that they're trustworthy with their data, you're going to treat it properly and protect it, then they will share it with you, some gladly, some grudgingly, but either way, they will share the data.
This is great information, David. I look at this as reminding us that as part of that agility, we have to tell stories to sort of build out, this is what the use case needs to look like. This is how the customer is going to operate within that story. And those stories really need to be told more from the point of view of the consumer, of the person we're interacting with, rather than from the marketer. And to your earlier point, we're going to be collecting data in a lot of different ways, and that data gets stored and held and managed in a lot of different ways. So I'd like to sort of dive down a little bit of a rabbit hole and talk about the changes. You know, it used to be that the CDP was done as a marketer tool because data warehouses were too slow. I could submit a request for a list of customers for segment, and maybe it would come back to me in a day, or maybe it would come back to me in a week, and that was too slow. So we've gone full circle on data warehouses. A lot of people are now storing their data in data warehouses that are in the cloud that are much more responsive. And this has led to a shift in the CDP landscape into something that is euphemistically called a composable CDP. Now, I have an opinion here. I think composability is really about architecture, not about CDPs. And we're already, as CDP vendors and as CDP advocates, we're living in a world where composability at the large level is already there. So I wonder if you'd like to talk a little bit more about what composable CDP really means. It doesn't quite fit the normal composable definition, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on where that fits, David.
Right. The term has been used kind of as a marketing term, but if you talk to the people who are advocates for composable, what they usually end up saying is that it means the data is stored in a cloud data warehouse. It's not stored in a separate CDP database. That's the real distinction they're getting at. And then you have tools or components that access the data that's in that cloud data warehouse. So their point is I can buy these different components rather than buying a single integrated CDP that, oh, by the way, pulls the data out into its own database. And you can argue both sides of that. Really, which is right for your company, really depends on the state of your existing data. If you happen to have a great cloud data warehouse, it's got all the data and it's all properly cleaned and identified and unified and all the things that you need to have it happen to make it usable for CDP, well, then that's great. You can add a couple of tools. If you don't have any of that, then adding all those capabilities into a cloud data warehouse is a huge project. It becomes a big development project. And honestly, it's going to make more sense in most cases just to go off and buy a separate CDP. So that's part of that discussion. It's a complicated thing because while CDPs originally were kind of used by marketers almost as a way of escaping from IT or supplementing IT, might be a more polite way to say that, because the IT guys had this data warehouse, but it wasn't really designed to do what a CDP is designed for, to have real-time access to customer data, for example. It just doesn't go there. So they were in IT, so perfectly happy. Yeah, go off and buy the CDP thing. It makes you happy, get you off my back, everybody wins. But now we're finding this world where customer data is used not just by marketers, but by service people, by sales people, by operations people. It's recognized as a major corporate asset. So now the IT guys aren't quite so willing to just sort of give up control of that And they see, all these other departments need access to this too. And even though a CDP in theory is designed, and in reality, in fact, is designed to let anybody access the data, any system access the data, CDPs that are built for marketing are going to kind of have a marketing flavor to them. So the enterprise level of customer data is going to take a slightly different approach to things. And that's where that warehouse-centric model makes a little more sense.
Yeah, I agree with most of what you've said. A couple of things I'd like to add. One is the warehouse itself often is really designed more as, if you will, an OLAP or analytics focused warehouse. It's designed for queries and visualizations and things like that. So to your point, getting the warehouse to be suitable for real-time interactions may be tricky. And in fact, you often will see, even in a situation where the data is stored in a data warehouse, it may be staged in a caching system of some kind or an in-memory system of some kind in order to drive real-time interactions. And the design of these components, making them all work with each other and making them pass data correctly into the data warehouse becomes, as you said, an interesting trick. The other thing here, and the point that we've made at the bottom of the slide, is that for the marketer really isn't interested in that underlying technology. Composable or whole CDP, it doesn't really matter. What they care about is things like cost and duplication. Do I have to pay twice for identity resolution because two components of my system have identity resolution? Am I having to watch out for shuttling data back and forth between multiple different systems and getting it out of sync? And is that going to get in the way of what I'm trying to do in order to do my work? And the core of that is, how many systems do I need to use? How can I make sure that I'm using my MarTech systems well? And how can I do that without having to learn to program SQL or to program in Python or whatever that data warehouse requires? So making sure that the interfaces and the processes and all of that fit the system becomes really important. And that's the point at which somebody may need to choose a CDP that fits their particular use cases, both the current use cases and the use cases that they might have in the future, and that fits in with their existing and future MarTech stack. So, doing a reverse ETL system that simply pushes static lists out into the different touch points may or may not meet your needs. You may need something more dynamic than that. You may need something that allows you to update and dynamically change your segments, add additional attributes into your segments, and so on. So I wonder, David, if you will, if you'd like to talk a little bit about the different kinds of CDPs and how they might meet some of those use case needs and improve or get in the way of marketer agility.
Right. So we at the CDP Institute classify CDPs in different categories. Now, all CDPs build profiles. All CDPs have that data component. So if you look at the simplest one up on top there, a data CDP just builds and shares profiles. And that's what makes it a CDP. That's pretty much the definition of a CDP, is building and sharing customer profiles. But as you say, Steve, people want to buy as few systems as they can, because otherwise you have integration costs and complexity and multiple interfaces and data movement and all kinds of things that don't add a lot of value, but do add a lot of cost, right? So a number of CDP vendors add analytical capabilities. Quite a few add what we've listed here as campaign capabilities, which is really message selection. So that can be both real-time interactions as well as audience lists for outbound campaigns. Some of them actually have delivery capabilities, so they can actually send out the email or personalize the website. Some of them are part of an operational system, like a reservation system in travel, for example. All right, and when you get into those big systems, those delivery systems, those operational systems that happen to have a CDP capability, that's really just one sort of fraction of what that system does. And the vendors have added that CDP capability because their clients asked for it, basically. But if it meets the criteria of a CDP, it takes in all the data, from external systems, which not every delivery system will do. It creates profiles. It shares the data with other systems, doesn't just use it for itself, which again, not every delivery system can do. Then we talk about that having a CDP inside. It's just one of many components. So which of these you need really depends on your existing state. What shape are my existing analytics and campaign and delivery systems in? Are they great? Do I love them? Can they handle the output of a CDP or connect to a CDP? In that case, well, I'll just buy a data CDP. But if those other systems kind of need to be replaced anyhow, then I'll see how many of those components I can buy. And in fact, if you look at the CDP marketplace, something like 2/3 of the CDP systems out there actually have those campaign and delivery capabilities. So most of the industry has decided that it's going to offer a pretty broad spectrum because that's what their clients are asking them for.
That makes sense to me, and that's especially sensible to the point that you made a little earlier. For if the marketer is going to be addressing use cases and sort of agilely, remember way back at the beginning, I talked about the need to respond to changed conditions, changed customers, and so on. We're seeing that now with the loss of third-party cookies in 2024. If we're going to be agile now and into the future, we have to pick a CDP that is going to let us exercise that agility. And way back when you first worked on defining the CDPs and wrote the paper that described what they were, that sharing is a big piece of it. Another big piece of it, even if we don't say the marketer owns the system now, at least the marketer is the primary user of the system. So those user interfaces in the campaign and delivery end of things really have to be designed for the marketer. Asking the marketer to learn a new way of doing things, whether it's SQL or Python or some other language, in order to pull a segment out of the system is not something you necessarily want to have the marketer do. That's a way of interfering with agility rather than improving it. And we see that also when we're looking at implementation of the CDP, where agility often gets expressed in the communications that's happening between the marketer and all of the other teams that are operating in order to make sure that the CDP implementation and CDP operation works as well as it can on behalf of those use cases and users that the marketer is trying to turbocharge, if you will. Can you talk a little bit about implementation? I'd love to have some ideas about what you see as necessary for making a CDP work in the first place. And then maybe in a minute, we'll talk about how that plays out also in an ongoing basis, since use cases are not static.
Right, and that is the key, that the use cases are not static. The use cases are going to start simple and get more complicated, but you have to look at the complicated use cases when you're selecting your system so that you make sure it can handle the more advanced stuff, not just get a system that's only going to do the simple things. And that comes down to talking to your users in all the different departments who are eventually going to be accessing the CDP to make sure that you meet all of their needs. Because that's probably the biggest problem we run into. Certainly our research shows that when people run into problems, they run into problems because they didn't consult their users. They didn't really understand, so they ended up buying a system or designing a system after they bought it, configuring it in ways that really didn't meet the user needs. And they show it to the user and they're all excited because, hey, we just gave you this great CDP thing. And the user look at them like, you got two heads because I didn't ask for this. I don't know what it is. It just sounds like more work for me. So you really have to have this continuing communication with your users throughout the entire implementation and purchase process to make sure that they understand what they're getting, that you understand what it is you have to deliver to them, assuming that you're on the delivery side of things. And then once you deliver it, they have to be trained, which is an area where, again, people often decide, oh, we'll just skip over that. They'll figure it out for themselves. Well, guess what? They probably won't. They'll probably actually look at it, get confused, and then go back to the old way of doing things. So it's really important to get them involved and keep them involved, make sure they're trained, make sure you measure the results so you can show, hey, they really are getting value from this. And then you have to look at some of these other issues that are here about, zero-party data. So again, where's my data going to come from? What new data do I need? What new data will I need? Things like AI is going to need all kinds of data that we didn't used to need. Privacy and compliance, huge, huge important issues now, growing kind of daily. Every day we look at the news, we see another privacy issue cropping up. And the CDP is critical for that. The CDP is where your customer data lives. More important, it's where your customer data is accessed. So you got to make sure that all the people are using that customer data in ways that are compliant. And the CDP is kind of the key. It's not exactly a bottleneck, but it's the key choke point that all that data is going to go through. So that's the place to really impose those controls and keep an eye on things. And then, of course, planning ahead for that rollout, what that's going to look like, and making sure that you do it probably one department at a time. So you get that one department really trained up well, and then you go on to the next department rather than spreading the use cases around one department here, the next one over there, the next one over there, which has some political value, but honestly, it's a lot more training and it kind of can result in a rejection of the transplant because they don't get adapted to the CDP in any particular group. They just use one use case and then they kind of get bored and go back to the other stuff. So there's quite an art actually to making sure you do this implementation well.
Yeah, that's a great point. And sort of, I love that analogy of the organism rejecting the transplant, because the CDP is, depending on how you look at it, you might think of it as a heart, or as, I like to think of it as a heart because it's pumping the lifeblood, the data throughout the organization and giving you what you need. In order to make that work, in order to avoid rejection, it seems to me that you have to keep looking at the CDP as a living, breathing project beyond your MVP, beyond your minimum viable project. Okay, I've done these use cases. I have to have a whole sequence of use cases. And that kind of fits back with the Agile story that we started off with. Part of what agility is about in development terms is building those user stories, setting them up, grooming them, being able to hand them off to teams that are then going to implement them. And the other side of any user story is being able to measure everything that's going on and understand what's working and what's not, drop or change or tweak or upgrade things that aren't working, and keep pushing forward with the things that are working so that you're continuing to communicate what success looks like. I'd love to know, Dave, if you can share a few ideas about both clients who have had real success with ongoing expanded horizons, and maybe a few of the rocks to watch out for that might get in the way.
Well, I think the rocks, probably poor training to me is probably the biggest rock that you're likely to falter on. Because again, it's really easy to not do training, and it's just such a bad idea. Best practices, things like Center of Excellence that are listed here, very important. Again, having people to go out and explain how to use the CDP and keep working at it until it becomes just kind of second nature, that people understand, hey, this is the first place I look for my customer data, not the last place I look if I can't find anywhere else. Right. So you have to kind of break some old habits and create some new habits that are going to really get people to take advantage of the CDP, because it's a fabulous asset. Right. And even if they find that, oh, the particular piece of data that I need isn't in there right now, the whole point of the CDP is it's easy to add new data. So if you identify a data source that you want, it should be really quite simple to put that in the CDP once you've figured out that it's something that's kind of worth investing in, as opposed to the old school data warehouses, or honestly, even the new school data warehouses, where adding a new data source can still be rather a challenge for any number of reasons. So I think educating people and getting them into that habit, that's probably the most important thing. Evangelizing it, certainly publicizing your successes is important. But it just comes back to creating new habits, and it's managing change. And of course, we know change management is difficult.
Oh yeah, oh yeah. And the other side of that too is it's very easy to get wrapped up in the technology aspects of things. Oh, I need to do this in the tech, rather than sort of coming back to the real focus that we want. What's the outcome? How do the customer journeys look at the end of this? How does customer experience look? How are interactions operating? How can I measure success, both the internal efficiency and return success and the external, are my customers happy? Are they continuing to interact with me? Are they trusting me? Are they taking me up on that value exchange that you talked about? I'm going to pause here before we go into questions and just spend 2 minutes doing a little bit of shameless plug for what it is that we at Redpoint do, which sort of fits this model that we've just been talking about around agility. The Redpoint CDP is geared towards being able to provide 4 basic pieces of functionality that are at least consonant with the core requirements of a CDP. CDP often neglects or skips over data quality. We at Redpoint feel that that's incredibly important. If your data is the lifeblood of all of the customer experience that's happening throughout the organization, not just in marketing, but in sales and operations, in service, returns, and in many other industries where it may not even be about sales, but about encouraging or empowering the healthcare consumer in their journey, or the financial services consumer in their journey. Data quality becomes fundamental to that. We also see identity resolution and the unification of the data as more than simply stitching data together. You have to be able to really understand which pieces represent what aspects of a customer's identity, and how they not just fit into a single customer identity, but how they relate into things like households and organizations for B2B marketing. And similarly with segmentation and activation, it's not enough just to push a list out to some touch point. You have to be able to support those interesting use cases that we talked about with real time, or with high cadence, or with use cases where the customer journey goes across multiple different touch points. You have to be able to be up to date and dynamic with how you meet the customer across all of those different touch points. With that, I'd like to turn it back to Becky. I'm sure we have some questions that have come in from our audience, and I'd love to spend some time with David being able to answer a few of those questions.
Great. Thank you for sharing all that great information and those use cases for setting up your strong stage so your dancers or your CDP can perform, to borrow a phrase from David from earlier in the presentation. And David and Steve, you guys are right. We have quite a few questions. So for the first one, Steve, why would marketers want a CDP instead of some other way of bringing the data together, like a data warehouse, a data lake, or another alternative?
So the answer is really in the name. A customer data platform is more than just a repository. So a data warehouse or a data lake may well be the way that you're storing the data underneath, but the things that a marketer is trying to do in those use cases require more than simply an agile storage mechanism. They require visualization. They require understanding data availability and quality, so that I understand that my data is the right data and is ready for use. And they, in particular, require that I be able to do things like experiment and optimize what I'm doing with segmentation and activation. And that's a much more interactive kind of a platform. That's not simply a collection of data. That's data with a bunch of visualizations, a bunch of ways for me to ask questions, a bunch of ways for me to interact with the data, extend the data beyond what comes in from the data warehouse, meet the privacy and compliance requirements by pulling information back in from the touch points about a customer who may have opted in or opted out, or said, only reach me on the channels this way. Did you want to add anything to that, David?
Well, yeah, I think, you hit it on the head. Is warehouse is designed to do what a warehouse is designed to do, which is basically analytical processing. And the CDP is really designed primarily, say, for marketers. As we said, most of them have all those analytical and campaign, and in some cases even delivery capabilities. And if they don't have the delivery capabilities, they have the connectors that are designed to connect to delivery systems. So if you don't have those, you're not going to have those in a warehouse. Very few warehouses have that stuff built in. Very few warehouses have any kind of real-time capability. You touched on that earlier. You have to have typically a separate system actually in your warehouse if you want to support real-time access. So there's just functionalities that have been built into the CDP because that's the desired use for the CDP. They're not built into the warehouse because they're not the design use for the warehouse.
Great. We actually have a question from a viewer asking for some clarification on the delivery CDP. Is it delivery of audiences or delivery of media to the audiences within the CDP? Steve, do you want to take that? Or David?
Let me take it because it's our definition. It's delivery of messages. So an email engine, for example, would make you a delivery CDP, or a website personalization tool, or pushing audiences out to media, although a static audience list would be handled by a campaign CDP as well. So it's message delivery is that we're talking about there. That clarifies.
And the only thing that I would add is because it's message delivery, somewhere, some software has to be actually composing and managing the collection of messages. So if I'm supposed to be delivering a ski offer to user A, and I'm supposed to be delivering a backpacking offer to user B, those offers have to live somewhere. And that kind of context, the management of the offer, management of assets that are associated with that, the decision and choice between them, the decision about which channels to deliver in them, is one of the things that distinguishes those delivery systems from some of the sort of simpler analytics only or campaign only, I'm going to deliver a list type of system.
Great. Thank you for that clarification. Next question. What are your suggested best practices to get more data directly from customers as third-party cookies go away? David, we'll start with you.
So the trick, again, to getting data from customers is that value exchange that we talked about earlier. You have to give them a reason to give you the data, all right? And the reason may be better service. It may be, discounts and coupons, which is the thing that they'll tell you that they want the most, but they'll also tell you that they want services, they want recommendations, they want things that are going to make their life easier. Basically, they're very practical people, these customers. They just want stuff that's good for them. The other big thing that you have to bear in mind, in some cases it's even more important than that kind of value delivery, is they have to trust that you're going to treat their data properly, you're going to protect their privacy, that you're going to honor their requests for how the data is used. And there's two components of that. One is sort of intentional use of the data, that you're going to comply with their requests, and the other is simply the security issue of making sure the data doesn't leak out and to someone else who steals it from you and have a data breach. So they want to understand what it is that you're doing to protect that and to honor their requests. And you have to have that trust for them to give you the data, even if you're going to deliver all those other benefits. If they don't think that you're going to protect their data, they don't care what discounts you're going to give them.
Yeah. And you've got to make sure that all of that happens in a way that feels transparent and clear to the user. Asking them to click on that they've read a 9-page terms and conditions form before they use their website may not be the best way of reassuring the customer that you're going to be a good steward for their data. Trying to make sure that the language is plain, demonstrating what you're actually going to do, giving them easy opt-in and opt-out and choices about how to use their data are all important components of trust.
And here's something you guys touched on a little bit earlier in the presentation, but CDPs can be built through the lens of sales, service, marketing, etc. Of those different teams, is there one group that tends to lead to more success?
I'll jump into the fray on that one and say my experience of that is that the marketers leading is a good way to start, as long as the marketers understand that this is a system about sharing customer data and figuring out use cases across a whole bunch of teams. My reasoning for that is that the marketers are the ones who have the most immediate, pressing, I've got to solve it now use cases, particularly with things happening now like the loss of third-party cookies and the rise of Gen AI and so on. Marketers are right at the cutting edge of trying to figure out how to incorporate all of those changes into intelligent use cases for customer experience. But the marketer has to recognize that they're doing that in a context of a much larger organization.
Yeah, I don't know that it's a particular department. I think it has more to do with the maturity and the expertise of whoever's leading the project. They again have to have those clear use cases. They have to engage their users. They have to understand what the system needs to do. They have to understand all the other systems that are going to interact with the CDP to make sure that they have the complete set of capabilities they need to deliver on those use cases. So whether it's starting in marketing or in service or in sales or whichever, it's that clarity and that commitment that's really going to determine whether you succeed or not.
Absolutely. And we do, I mean, when I say marketers are leading, we do have lots of examples at Redpoint where the marketers define the system, but a bunch of the use cases are things like human mediated use cases. Imagine the returning customer coming to a hotel and the hotel has information because of the CDP about what this customer's favorite beverage is and knows that when the customer arrives, what they want to do is be able to go to their room and relax and unwind. That information is in the system. So you meet them by having their favorite beverage show up in their room on their table. And that's an operational kind of a concern for the hotel that has a marketing impact.
Clarity leads to success. I love it. I might suggest that is a hat for the next time, David. We have time for one more question. What is the difference between how I run my MarTech today and how I would run it with an Agile CDP? Steve, let's start with you.
Oh boy, that's if you don't have a CDP at all, then you're probably doing a lot of what I would call armchair integration. You have to be operating from one system to the next system to the next system and manually moving everything around. If you move to a CDP, but you don't consider agility, you may have automated some pieces of that, but you may still have to be coordinating everything across the different touch points. By moving to agility, your goal is how fast can I make the next use case work? How fast can I make the next data source active? How fast can I bring up the next touch point that I need? And sort of turning it around, how well can I measure what I'm doing and what the results are, and therefore figure out what success looks like? Dave, you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, no, I think that's it. You know, if you don't have the CDP, then every project is kind of starting from scratch, as you say, swiveling on the chair from this system to that system to the next system. So any change, any new thing becomes a major hassle because you have to figure out how am I going to do this one? And maybe it's similar to something you did before, maybe it's not. But once you have the CDP in place, at least the data piece of that is done. I know where my data is. I know it's good data. I know I can use it and trust it and rely on it. And I can pick it up. And at least that part of the project is not something for me to worry about. I still have to worry about whatever else is new. I have to make sure my other systems can handle it. I have to make sure it's worth doing. I have to measure the value. I have to do all these other things. But at least I have a head start. I don't have to spend a lot of time figuring out how am I going to get this data in the first place. That's what you gain with the value with the Agile CDP. You don't have to answer that question every time.
Great. We love having at least one question answered. David and Steve, thank you again for all of the great content and answering all of the questions from our audience. We really appreciate it. Before we wrap up, let me take a moment to tell you about eMarketer's media channels. You can register for live analyst and Tech Talk webinars on our events page at emarketer.com/events. On the audio side of the house, don't forget to tune in to Behind the Numbers, eMarketer's daily podcast. And finally, please check out our newsletters. Thank you all for your time. And thanks again, David and Steve, the team at Redpoint Global, and our eMarketer Studio team behind the scenes for making this webinar possible. We'll see you all on the next Tech Talk.